Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose,
Rose?
and today we're going to talk about a concept that comes up in OG Rose a lot. We talk about enclosure and enclosurists and being enclosed, and how that's kind of a critical concept we can kind of relate to self relating negativity in Hegel. We talk about self effacement, and that's always tied to the concept of this enclosure that we can also associate with the Ouroboros. Wow, it got stuck on my tongue. Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail.
Orbos?
Yes, yes, that one.
I know,
Yeah,
I'm
that
not sure
one.
I'm
No,
saying it
that one.
correct.
And how that idea is really important, and also I think we can experience it in our personal lives, and it's something that actually happens to people all the time,
Mhm.
and there's a kind of phenomenology that can be described of it. But to start, Michelle, what do you think of when I say enclosure or enclosing? What comes to mind?
Mm. Yeah, that's all very good. I mean, I think the way that we were discussing with each other off recording about it was really interesting and very like you were saying, it's something that I think most people can relate to very strongly because basically enclosure, what does it feel like phenomenologically to be enclosed or to experience enclosure? I mean, I also just think about generally connotations with that word, right?
Mm,
There could be good things about enclosure in the sense of like it feels safe, it
yeah.
feels cozy, it's a habitat, you enclose something,
Yep.
a space, or like you make a container, right? You make
Hmm.
but to me, a container is usually a little bit different because it's something that, yes, you have containment in order to have transformation,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or yeah, it's like you're transmuting or there's an alchemy happening in that process of that container for like almost a yeah something to come out and forth from that.
Hmm.
But in the way that we often talk about it in our work at OG Rose of enclosure, I think about it like this. It's interesting because you get kind of there's a trapped feeling. I think that phenomenologically what we mean when we're talking about enclosure and why it's a negative thing, why we want to try to understand it so that we don't fall into it, or don't even realize we're in it. And then we're
Yep.
like, why do I feel so stuck? Or why does life suck? Or whatever it is,
Yep.
right? Why is life so hard? Um, is that what happens is that it's something that you can actually feel as stifling, right? Something that feels there's tension, but not in the good way.
Right.
We talked a lot about holding the tension in the Hold On
Mhm.
episode. Um, but there is tension that is a result of enclosure, and it's not a ten and the thing is, if you don't have anything in which, like, we're all going to feel that tension that can be negative sometimes, but what are you going to do in that moment? You can actually have, like we talk about, we have an essay called the flip moment. You can make that tension go one way or the other, right? It could be an opportunity, or it could be it could be an opportunity for that transformation, or it can be an opportunity for the enclosure,
Yep.
which doesn't it's it does this kind of internal
Hmm.
spiraling, right? This
Hmm.
internal spiraling within.
Hmm.
And I like that. And that's kind of a language that is good. I've heard that too with some of the women I bring up at the village. But basically, this concept of spiraling versus oh gosh, what's the like kind of term to juxtapose that? It's kind of spiraling versus being able to um basically,
Like shrinking or going in?
so there's a spiraling,
Whirlpool.
yeah, which would be like the whirlpool of
Uh,
just losing it
uh-huh.
essentially.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then there's the other, which would be you're still doing a type of circling. It's like it's maybe it's more of the expansion and the unraveling and the
Hmm.
unwinding of being able to be more stable and have a type of circling process, but not in the downward spiral. It's
Sure,
like
sure.
you start to learn how to orbit your own sense of self in the world and
Yeah.
how to communicate and
Hmm.
how to be. And that's, it's like I think about how you talk about Plato's forms, which is so interesting, this idea of the orbiting,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so, right there, it sort of shows you how, like, we talk about it where there's isometric forms like this.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay,
Right.
well, there's expansion, there's enclosure and there's container, right? Like,
Yeah,
we're always kind of
yeah,
making these, it's
yeah.
not to make binaries, but it's the fact that these things actually unfortunately, they're in a
Incredibly
sense, unfortunately,
similar.
they're so similar.
Yes.
And we have to get really discerning and wise about how they are different, because
Yes.
and how you know that is your body will show you, your sensations will show you how they
Hmm.
are different. Because
Yes.
to be enclosed, and this, like, the very real example of how people feel enclosed often is in their spousal relationship,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Mhm.
Or in their family relationship where, husband and wife just like are, but all, they're tired, they're, something comes up, and then they're, there's a misunderstanding, and then they're grumpy at each other,
Yep.
and then there's
Mhm.
that enclosure. It's the
Yep.
feeling in the atmosphere right then, it's as thick as you could cut it with a knife. It's just,
Uh-huh.
it's very thick, it's very palpable. And that really is enclosure. It's not some abstract philosophy concept. It's like people experience enclosure all the time, and what it leads to
Yes.
is, this mumbling in your head and this little
Mhm.
story in your head
Real.
about, how much they're wrong, whatever it is, right? How much they don't understand, or how much this, how much that, and this is the spiraling and the negative that the women of the village will talk about. But basically, it's that, yeah, you're circling something, but you're going down, 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 and you're
Mhm.
enclosed, and you're not actually able to be open to what is the difference there. And for us, like we talk about the fact that really, if you don't have, and this is why we harp on it so much, but philosophizing your life and why philosophy can be so
Yep.
helpful is because if you have at least philosophy where you can go to some neutral territory of ideas, and you
Mhm.
can be able to at least kind of break like you can break that tension with something that can be co-creative between the two people, between you and your spouse, and you can start to soften, and you can start to ease into that space of, yeah, you have differences, yes, you may have disagreements, but you also are both there, you love each other, you're human, you do desire to still relate, right? I mean, um so if you want to do that, you need to know the skills and the tools in order to do that, which is philosophy and conversation. And again, people are like, why philosophy? Like, why call it philosophy? We do actually have an essay called Meta Talks, where if you would like to think about it in a different way, you could think about it in terms of meta talk, or
Mhm.
where you're basically just being able to step back. And now meta talks is more specific, where you're able to actually, and this is a good skill. This isn't exactly maybe this would, I would say, be a little bit more advanced, where you can actually say, hey, it seems like every time this topic comes up, it's hard for us. There's
Why?
this
Yeah.
enclosure
Yep.
feeling. There's this tension feeling, and it's not
Yep.
good. And I tend to shut down, and you tend to shut down,
Mhm.
or somebody, it's fight, flight,
Yes.
or freeze, or fawn, or whatever the four F's are. And it meta talks is being able to talk about
Yes.
how you
The
talk, right?
dynamics. Yeah.
But I would say what's fun about philosophy is it even offers something that's a little bit more accessible,
Mm.
where you don't just avoid and change the subject, but you sometimes acknowledge that, you know what, that was kind of stupid. Or the thing we're worried about isn't, it's not the time or place to really get into a longer conversation. If you're in the car with
Mhm.
kids, or you're in it, just there's so many situations where it might not be appropriate to do a meta talk at that moment. Maybe it would be, but to be able to say, like, okay, let's just talk about something where we can get back into connection with each other.
Mhm.
Let's talk about ideas. Let's talk about, now,
Mhm.
some people, a lot of times in the mainstream, I think people use humor a lot,
Yeah.
where it's uncomfortable, so let's just do the
Yeah.
jester,
That's right, right, right.
um and but really, I mean, and that's where, like, a lot of literature will point to the jester being such a wise, actually
Mm.
a interestingly
Mhm.
wise figure. But really, what you're trying to get back to, like, a social lubricant, or like a relational lubricant, and that's what philosophy is, because it means you can talk about things in a neutral way where there's no judgment. And the thing is, you feel enclosure because of judgment usually.
Mhm. Yeah.
So to get out of it, you go to that suspension of judgment of philosophy that we talked a lot about in the first episode, that then can allow you to ease that feeling, and to
Yes.
soften into that tension.
Yes.
And again, maybe you can circle back to that, and hopefully you should be able to be mature enough to be able to do that, the meta talks. But yeah, if you can talk about ideas with each other, that's something that can kind of remind you about, like, oh wait, maybe I didn't have to get mad at him because he had my last sip of coffee. I mean, just, this is what I
Yeah.
mean about, sometimes it
Oh, yeah.
really is stupid stuff. Now, sometimes it feels like the
Mhm.
stakes are higher on what couples will argue about or feel upset with each other about, or I feel so misunderstood, you feel, and everybody feels hurt. But that's the thing, philosophy comes in and offers an opportunity to play and actually create something together. And actually, one last thing, I've been talking a lot, but one last thing, I was thinking about how much therapy is like, can be ineffective because it just ruminates,
Mm.
and it tries to get to this kind of like gnostic, what's the kind of term we use, where it's like this kind of, it's like this, the noumenon of knowledge of, like, why is the relationship messed
Mhm.
up, like, try, and yes,
Yeah.
there is a place for excavating one's past. I think you should try to do that first and foremost with yourself, and then you can maybe step into
Mm.
that with an intimate or close
Mhm.
relation. But what's so fascinating is that so little have I heard of therapy really. And I mean, depends, there's many different types, so
Mhm.
I'm sure there are some that are really great
Of
out
course.
there, and we know some people who do really great works
Sure.
in this regard, of agency and like what you're
Mhm.
creating. But a lot of what I've known in the mainstream of therapy, not help with the enclosure. It might make it worse
Yeah.
because it doesn't actually ask you what you want to create and what you want to become and how you want to feel in your relationship and what you love about that other person and how to get more grateful. You know what I'm saying? It
Right.
just does like it kind of just almost circles the enclosure. And I don't and so instead of doing this thing of like, oh, what is my like, who am I in the world?
Mhm.
And why does who I am in the world, how does that make me a better wife?
Right.
Or able to relate to my husband. Oh, well, actually, I become more confident. I don't feel as defensive. I don't get as insecure. I don't take
Mhm.
what he says personally because I
Mhm.
feel more confident in who I am, not in an
Right.
egoic way, not in a, well, I'm just not gonna, it's more like
Right.
a confidence that can also deal with conflict. It can
Mhm.
deal with the tension that can soften into that, but also
Mhm.
doesn't completely lose yourself completely, just like you're just gone. Now you're just somebody else who's, the very loud silent person in the room or the car or
Right.
whatever. Like in the sense that a lot of people just, they sort of like mute themselves, but they're being really loud in how muted they are with how they're handling that enclosure. And again, people are hurt. And then, but this is why we need some tools, guys. Like we need tools. We need to know what are some things you can go to, like get,
Yep.
this is very practical. What are things you can do when things get difficult, and when it gets to be that the enclosure feels so suffocating and can feel so stifling, and then you're just, and look, like I was telling Daniel, I was like, oh my gosh, I guess if you don't have a way to get out of that, that's just what you're living in.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
literally what you are living in, and you're not really sure what to do.
Mhm.
And everything you've kind of been taught to get like therapeutic, whatever it is, therapy your way out of it is just going to further perpetuate the rumination of the issue, or
Mhm.
thinking you're just the issue, versus instead of thinking like, what are we making? How do we play? How do we engage in ideas? How do we think about some neutral terrain that we could both play with and have fun with? But again, it's really difficult because most people do conversation as combating, right? It's just,
Mhm.
it's so hard to see people even be able to have conversation that's not becoming a trivia thing or who's right, what the facts are,
Yep.
and just it becomes a little war right there, and instead
Mhm.
of it being like an opportunity for a connection.
Yep. Yep.
So that was a lot. I'll throw it
No,
back to you.
there's a lot that's very important. I think very often people think the main problems in relationships or life is doing what's wrong or doing the wrong thing.
Mm,
That's really not your biggest threat. Your biggest threat is ending up in an enclosure.
yeah.
That actually the concern about right and wrong makes worse, right?
Mm, mm,
Also, I would say maturity is moving from learning to not be, to give in to the temptation for the obvious wrong. As you get older, say in your mid years, or I want to say spiritual maturity, the challenge becomes avoiding enclosure,
mm,
which is different than simply, not resisting the temptation to do something you know you shouldn't, for example,
mm,
right? But
mm.
basically, people's moral life never gets beyond that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all it ever stays in, and then they overfit it as they get older, so there's trouble.
Oh, I was just thinking about how funny it is, how easy it is to just think, well, I'm doing this to be holy. And meanwhile, you're literally like a whole of a person. You're
Yep.
just like
Hmm.
either, and
Yep.
you're, again, this kind of present absence that you have. And there is like a longer conversation on the fact that we do engage always with kind of a present absence or partial object or
Mhm.
partial knowledge, unveiling, all of that. Um, but it's it's hard because you have to start to question yourself, right? Why am I really doing this? I'm doing this because I think this is the right thing to do and the holy thing to do. um, but how is it making me as a person? Like how is it
Mhm.
making me more capable to relate? So yeah, but I want to say, when
Absolutely.
you said about avoiding enclosure, do you think that's it, Daniel, or is it that we will get into an enclosure and then we have to know what to do when that happens? Because
Well, I
we're
mean,
not, we're humans, right? So we're going to find ourselves in that, but we
one
can
would
we can avoid,
improve,
one would improve, right?
and
So you
you
can
can
avoid
add a
it.
whole. I
Yeah.
mean, the whole idea is that yes, you're going to be in the structures of enclosures, but you can add holes and make them open circles, or you integrate with lack and
Yeah.
lack, which
You
is
create
hard,
harmony.
but actually that opens it into
Mm,
the form, the different direction that you were
mm,
describing.
mm,
Yeah, enclosure is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be final.
mhm,
And you certainly can get out of enclosure, but the problem is enclosures can theoretically be lifelong because hell is eternal and the structure of enclosure is hell. It's locked from the inside. It is
mm,
a self-relating logic, a self-relating negativity that one could argue we're capable of doing because that's the structure of subjectivity following Zizek. And if we're not rightly oriented to that self-relating negativity, it never sublates. And then you get into massive trouble, right?
Right.
So there's a few things. So there's something about discerning the formation of enclosures that becomes extremely necessary for development. And if relationships, and I do think this is generally true, as you get older, many of your challenges of being a human are relation based.
Yeah.
When you're a child, your parents, or not always, of course, but there's more of an idea of the givenness of relationality. Parents, you're born somewhere, your parents take care of you, but as you get older, relationships are much more negotiated, they're much more managed. You have to figure them out versus just be in them, right? Well, as you have to figure them out, it is typically in relationships where the enclosure problem develops.
Mm.
And if you're not ready for that, then your relationships will become torments. People talk all the time, oh, community is great, relationships are so important. Well, for many, many people, they're horrible. Actually,
Mm.
because of this
Yeah.
problem, because of this enclosure problem that is not people are not aware of. The other thing that just should be noted is that if people stay on a moral development that is more for children, well, even if you could say that necessary stairway steps to sainthood, if misordered, become falls into the demonic. Like you can't be when you're mid years living a moral theory as if you're a teenager. That will lead
Exactly.
to overfitting and trouble
Yeah.
and a
That's
lack of spiritual maturity.
mm.
Um, so for examples with enclosure that I think are common, so people have a sense of it. You're sitting at dinner, people are talking, and you say something about, oh, we the neighbor was at the store this morning, and somebody says, no, they weren't. You're gonna go, oh no, I thought I said no, they weren't. They were at home. And you kind of feel, "Oh, I thought that I saw them that day," and then you kind of like, "No, that's wrong. Don't be, don't. That's wrong." So then you feel this kind of, why did I open my mouth? And maybe you're sitting at the table and you're just trying to think of something to say. This is the other issue that happens. You're just trying to think of something to say because we're all sitting here and nobody knows what to say. So you're just trying to make conversation, and the other people aren't even trying. Maybe they're on their cell phones or something like that. And then when you try to speak, it's met with a no, a kind of bam, right?
Mm.
So then you can kind of feel like, the game Operation, as a kid, the surgery game where if you hit the sides, it buzzes. Enclosure and Operation go together because when you feel the buzzes, you kind of back off. You go, mm. And then
Mm.
you also feel hurt because I'm just trying to make this a nice time and I bring up something. And if every little detail is not correct, I get attacked.
Mhm.
Now, there's also something to be said about just straight up making up stuff, right?
Sure.
But
Sure.
generally, people in those settings are recalling best they can, thinking about what to come up, but they get hurt, right? And so then they withdraw.
Mm.
There's no law that's created that says you can't talk or you can't interact, and just times that by 100, every day
Yeah. Just
for
all this micro
little
compounding.
these
Yep.
little micro things that happen.
Hmm.
Um, there's no law that says the person can't speak, and no one ever came out and officially said you are no longer allowed to speak, but you feel like you can. So you enter into an enclosure.
Right. And somebody would, it's interesting because for the person who might be, essentially fact checking, like, no, they weren't,
Yeah.
they don't feel like they're attacking,
Mm-mm.
right? They feel like, hey, if it what like, it's for them, again, they're doing the
They're
right
defending
thing.
truth.
Yeah, they're defending truth. They're like, well, we want to get the fact, we want to say the right story. We don't want to make stuff up.
Right, which
But
suggests
usually,
why truth without beauty is problematic, just like good without beauty, as
yeah,
Thomas Jockin discusses.
yeah. But it usually also it's interesting because who is it that said like words are red herrings or something like that? Some
Well, Harold Bloom's all about and
yeah.
Chekhov and kind of like what people say is often not what they mean. I mean, that's a
Mhm.
literary notion. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because these little slips and things that come out reveal often a bigger thing because
Yeah.
somebody might get really they might really be like fact checking about something that
Hmm.
kind of like doesn't really like it gets, and this is the thing, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter
Hmm.
about, and I did do a recording on this one time about fact checking. I forget what I called it. I probably had some kind of wordplay or something like that, but
Oh, it's
oh,
Heath
I think,
Ledger. Heath Ledger said that words
oh,
are red
okay.
herrings. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ledger. So basically, the idea that like these little slips and words that come out often are revealing something that's much bigger going
Yes.
on in the
Yes.
background.
Yes.
Because, like, for example, somebody might like acknowledge how it probably doesn't matter some little detail
Hmm.
of some story. However, feel that maybe there's a macro thing going on, that they are feeling quite it's like they don't know how to address that, so they'll just address it, like this concept of
Mhm,
possibly like not being truthful, right?
mhm,
Or so they're going to address it in like the conversation, because they feel like at least there I can feel like I can assert what's right,
yeah,
and do and kind of do something about it.
mhm,
Whereas a lot of people feel very helpless
yes,
in their relations, because it's very
they're
confusing, right? Like, we're
compensating,
both
yeah,
adults, we both have like a lot of people who are married have the same general frameworks for stuff, like they might be have the same religion, all these things.
mm,
So then, like, they've got years together, right? So they've got a lot of good ground actually to work with in terms of being able to have conversation. But um, when for whatever reason people have different ways of relating to the world, and aren't even sure that they're not even aware that they do that necessarily. Anyways, it can be very confusing, because you're like, I just don't understand. Like, don't we both know what it means to be truthful, or don't we both know what it means to be caring?
uh-huh,
These terms, and
yeah,
this is why this goes back to like our first episode of philosophizing your life, because we're talking about like, and this has come up in a couple of other episodes when I talked about vocabulary
mhm,
and stuff. But this is why actually defining those things as a couple is super important,
yes,
actually. And doing it in a neutral, unjudgmental way, to
yes,
realize, oh, wait, we define these differently. Interesting.
yes,
Okay, how do you define it? How do I define it? How could we define it? And it's like basic stuff. And yet, like,
mhm,
and I say that, but also, like, I kind of, there's a part of me that feels like a lament, because it's really hard to do the basic stuff. Like,
yes,
I'm even thinking on, like, there's
well,
this thing that I've been wanting to do. Like, it's basically answering a prompt. And I still haven't done this. And I don't know why I've taken, it's just interesting, because as humans, life just kind of goes, and you're just in your little habit loops. And even if you're trying to do things that are outside of your habit loop or whatever, you still, like, it's still going to take quite a bit of effort and energy to do something that's just a little bit different, or to do something that you feel is important to do. And a lot of times why one might not do that is because you feel it's not necessary, because you feel, well, I know what I think about that, or I know how I'd answer that. So then you don't take the 5 minutes or
mhm,
10 minutes to just write down what your answer is. But it's just interesting, because so that was kind of a lot. But to try to put it more succinctly, I think there's a lot of confusion for adults in relations, because they don't understand how and why they aren't on the same page. And then that macro thing that's going on shows up in these little conversation, or these
yes,
little moments in
mhm,
conversation, where it slips out that somebody's going to be really on it, or like on the other person about some little detail that's kind of insignificant. It doesn't kind of really matter.
mhm,
But then what they say, but truth matters, doesn't it? And being honest matters.
mhm,
Like, it and again, that's why philosophy matters, because like, is it okay if somebody misses a detail in a story? But and then there's you have grace, and realizing, well, what's ultimately, why are you even having the conversation? um and that's what my recording was about, because it was like, is it more about the facts, or is it about the relating? But
right.
then somebody would have to be like, it's destabilizing though, because somebody's like, but truth and honesty, and we have to be honest. You know what I mean? So it's a lot there, but I just think those little moments reveal like something a lot bigger going on in the background. So I'll
Well,
pass it to you.
but notice, first off, yes, people make philosophical appeals. Don't we care about truth? Doesn't the truth matter? The problem is everyone is philosophical and they make appeals to philosophy in these moments, but then they don't have training or do philosophy, so that just is an assertion that leads to the enclosure mechanism being invincible. Because if you use philosophy and can't do philosophy, you're in huge trouble because you're using a meta move to seal the enclosure,
Mhm.
right? So you're not using the meta to take a standpoint by which to see the dynamic to move beyond it. You're using it to
Ooh,
seal yourself
interesting.
in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
And so
So
you're
like people are doing this anyway. They're just doing it in the, like we're saying, in this downward spiral kind of
yes, they're
enclosure way.
going up to go down
Mm.
as opposed to going up to keep going
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
open
To
up,
open up, to
right?
expand. Yeah,
Like again, if there's a real
that's
sense
good.
in which if people
That's good.
never did philosophy, then you wouldn't need philosophy in a certain sense. The problem is that everyone is doing philosophy and they're making
Exactly.
philosophical
They're making
assertions,
moral, ethical,
or
and
they say
philosophical
something
claims.
like, "I thought that person loved me." Like that may
Mhm.
not sound like I thought they don't they love me. That may not sound like a philosophical claim, but what is love? Why would they is it possible that someone in love would do that which you would experience not as love? Like, all of those have certain assumptions in them that can only be justified by something like a philosophical inquiry.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
really the issue is ultimately like, so there's a few things. Enclosure, yes, there's a sense in which enclosure scenarios are inevitable. Once they occur, there is an incredibly high chance that philosophy is going to be employed It like always
Mhm.
is. And it's
Interesting.
either going to go up, down, or it's going to go up, get out of the
Mhm.
enclosure, right? And so you really need philosophy. And I mean, what we were talking about in the car is basically if you're in an enclosure dynamic, if you don't have philosophy, you can't get out. It's just going to go on. Because the way to look at that, like if you've got two people um, who basically feel I work really hard for this family and I'm not appreciated, and the
Mhm.
person takes it for granted or
Mhm.
something,
Mhm.
right? There that dynamic can go on forever,
Mhm.
right? Because you've defined, I want to say, the ground, the horizontal terms by which you're engaging, right?
Mhm.
So if you never go, well, wait, what does it mean to work hard? Like,
Mhm.
wait, but why do
What
I
does it
think
mean?
they
What does it
don't
mean to
appreciate?
provide?
What
What
does it
do I?
mean to provide?
Why
And
do I
start.
think they're not?
That's right. So what you're doing is you're going this way. So
Mhm.
that means you can get past it. But without that meta move, you're just going to bump heads forever. And
Mhm.
basically, what is it? This is what tends to happen with enclosure. Someone gets hurt, they bump heads, and then they stay away. And since every time they talk, they just fight, it's better just to close off from the other, and then you confuse relationship with proximity.
Mhm.
Most people actually, in a sense, don't have relationships. They have proximity because they're enclosures, which may sound like a horrible thing to say, but relationship is qualitative, not
Mhm.
quantitative. And so many people, if you don't deal with the problem of enclosure,
Mhm.
which you can feel, you can cut it with a knife. You don't. There's a sense in which what you're calling a relationship is simply a proximity.
Mhm.
Because if you're closed off to the other, in what sense do you relate to them? In fact, what happens is the proximity is a reminder of your enclosure. So all you ever experience around them is a reminder you're enclosed.
Mhm.
Enclosed. Now, I would say that's a Flannery O'Connor and Grace, because in the pain of that enclosure, it's making you aware you're enclosed, that you can then work out of it. But if you don't have philosophy, you're not going to be able to do it because you're not going to be able to think that and move. Please.
Well, and you've said that like the idea like if you don't have philosophy, but we also said that you will still be doing
Yes,
philosophy. So
that's
it's
right.
basically like if you
If you
don't
don't have
have
conscious philosophy, if you don't
conscious
have the
philosophy,
art of
if you don't
philosophy,
have the
yes,
awareness of philosophy, and
yes,
then the necessity
the
for it,
practice,
hmm
right?
hmm then you will, yeah, you will be enclosed. Actually, it's got me thinking about this idea that I do wonder if like the progress. And I was thinking about this too after we had yeah, just getting to talk to our dear friend Charlie about
Mm,
this idea of control, and I was thinking more on that word, and I was thinking about how we've possibly outsourced our climate control or like our environment. The environment is the environment for the relations, right? So we, a lot of our modern conveniences and technologies do a type of climate control, right? And this is literally just, this is what we're going to keep the temperature at, right? And I'm not bashing that, but what I'm saying is that I do wonder if, like, on a psychosomatic level, we've outsourced a lot of our creating the climate and the environment in such a way that we keep that controlled, but we have no real sense of how to control ourselves and how to like kind of uh, get a gauge of, oh, okay, when is it appropriate to say this, when might be appropriate to make a joke, maybe,
right.
because sometimes joking can be a great way out of the enclosure
Yeah,
feeling. It
but
just
they can
depends on the
also be
moment.
repressive.
Yeah, and
Like
it
it
can also be
depends.
at the expense of
Yeah.
another person, which is
Yes.
not good.
Yeah.
So but it's like we've kind of, there's a way in which, yeah, we don't really know how to do climate control of ourselves and of our
Yeah.
relations because we kind of just, just set it and forget it, right? The technological
Yeah. It's
essence is
just
always that.
technology.
It's
Yeah.
like, just let it do
Hmm.
the thing, just
Right.
have the screen. That's the climate control. Yo, look, we're in control because we're not even trying, like, but that's because everybody's like
Hmm.
staring at a screen and not looking at one another and not even trying to talk.
Hmm.
um so I was thinking about that, and then the other thing I was thinking about is how a lot of the wisdom from the village women that I like to listen to is about this idea of like actually literally getting outside. And I was wondering how much that just has to do, again, on a psychosomatic level, where if you're, as a modern, and so many people spend a lot of time inside. I
Oh
mean, a
yeah.
lot of time. I get it. It's there's also cold seasons and all of that. I get it, but the ability to, like, regularly and kind of make yourself go outside and get outside of your house and get outside and walk around, and there's something about that I think could maybe do, so we've got two things happening. We've got the modern kind of being inside, and then we've got the inside of this self-relating negativity of how people then are on their phones a lot inside. So it's like, it's almost like two layers
Yeah.
of enclosure. So anyway, I'm just thinking of the fact that there, and it's not just simply about going outside. It's because going outside has certain, like, nutritional elements in the
Sure.
earth that are
Sure.
actually good for your body, that are needful for your body. So then nobody's doing that, or not, people are not doing that regularly
Yeah.
enough. And so then they also don't, they kind of feel, they can feel blah anyway.
Yes.
and then they don't have enough like mental
Yes.
clarity and
Hmm.
capacity to
Yeah.
know how to have clear communication, or how
Correct.
to
Correct.
have creative communication, how to have philosophical conversation, because like your reserves are really low. So then you're
Yes.
just like, yeah, you're just kind of you're kind of going to go to your most basic, like your most primordial, easiest stuff.
Yeah.
And the easiest stuff is the hindbrain, right? That's where
Yeah.
you're like not able to really have very good logical
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
rational
Yeah.
type of conversations. You're going to just kind of be like going to your old patterns. You're going to go to your old patterns of survival, and
Yes.
then it's also going to be a lot of times just avoidance and argue and just go back to
Hmm.
your little enclosure. um
Yeah.
so something else was coming to mind, but it slipped now. But go ahead. You can go ahead.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I'll throw it
mean,
back to you.
a great survival mechanism is not interacting with people, because then you know you're safe, right? So the enclosure gets tied to the lizard brain, energy saving, and things like that.
Mhm.
And also, it seems rational, because if every time I talk with this person we fight, or there's just pain, then it would
Yeah.
be
Or
rational not.
shut down or
Yeah,
something.
why talk to them, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, another way to think about enclosure, maybe we could word it this way as well, is enclosure is tied to a feeling of an inability to change the quality of a relationship.
Mm,
Like, no
mhm.
matter what you do, the quality doesn't change.
Oh yeah.
Like, you get to this place where it just doesn't seem like anything changes the quality of relationship. So I think enclosure is more quality based. It is more field. It is atmosphere. It is energy. It is these kind of things that are extremely clear. Everyone knows what they are. Everyone knows what vibes are. But if you ask, how do you create vibes? How do you make vibes? How do you manage vibes? People, it becomes very mysterious, and people might turn to music,
Mhm.
or I don't know. Well, different things. The argument, basically, basically, that is being suggested, that I think is extremely clear, is there's something about philosophy. I mean, you mentioned climate control. There's something about philosophy and vibe control, field control, that are
Yep.
incredibly tied together.
1000%.
You have no control over vibes and your fields and the quality of relationships without philosophy. Maybe you get lucky and never end up in a fight or an enclosure, but it's just extremely, especially in a global pluralized world where difference is no longer mediated by givenness.
Mm,
The likelihood of ending up in closure is through the roof.
yeah.
And if you don't have philosophy to create the third thing by which to mediate the relationship, you're probably going to end up, very high chance you're going to end up in closure and not be able to get out of it. So there's something about philosophy, and I'll give it to you. Philosophy has something to do with the ability to own and control vibes, fields.
Mm, okay.
If you're pissed off at your spouse, or you feel yourself closed, and you're about to open your mouth and you don't, and then it goes another 10 minutes of slow. Like, philosophy can go a long way to reminding you, how are you so sure you're right? This
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
where deconstructing certainty, which many people associate with doom and nihilism, is actually a wonderful thing, because if you can ask yourself philosophical questions where you think you're so right or that person is so wrong, well, then you can start building back up your energy to open your mouth and speak to them, and move beyond, right? Because so much of the enclosure is I'm right, they're wrong,
Mhm.
right? And I'm in the right, and every time I try to speak to them, they attack me. So it's not merely I'm
Mhm.
right in the sense of I know that what's true and they don't. It can be I'm the suffering servant. I'm righteous, right? So
Mhm.
enclosure can be I'm right, or it can be I'm righteous,
Mhm.
but every time I try, I suffer for it.
Mhm.
So, that's where the vector of the good, as we speak with Jockin, contributes to this problem. And basically, without the beautiful, which subsumes all the vectors into the matrix that can kind of hold together diversity and harmony, you're in massive trouble. So, yeah, philosophy trains you, yeah, because the ability to speak well, and to actually engage in conversation, and to keep the thread going, this changes the quality of the interaction. So if you don't have philosophy, you don't have any ability for vibe control. Like, we could just say, you have no control over the field. If it's good, great. If not, great. And basically, for most people, since it seems random, since they don't know how to control the field, they just go out and they say, well, let's do those things that when I do, I can kind of. People have no control. I guess the other thing I'm saying is people have no control over self-forgetfulness. Self-forgetfulness is a mystery. They don't know when it happens, or why it happens, but they can associate doing certain things as making them forget about all their problems because they're having fun. That's where people are going out and spending money and doing things, because you can get caught up in the adrenaline of that and forget your pain, but that's just a numbing device, right? And that's dopamine and all that different stuff. So enclosure, I guess what I'm saying is, if you have a society of people suffering enclosure who have no skills on how to get out of that enclosure, they're going to be incredibly susceptible to dopamine, to
Mm,
attention capture on Instagram and all those things. They're going to be extremely vulnerable to numbing mechanisms because that's the only thing that's isomorphic and like self forgetfulness. But
mm,
it's not
mhm.
true self forgetfulness, but
Oh,
it's the
yeah.
closest they can get because they can't control their lives in a manner to cultivate real self forgetfulness,
Mhm.
such as in the philosophical discussion, improvisation, and music.
Yeah.
So the enclosure leads right into this kind of counterfeit of self forgetfulness that we see.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, that's good. And it makes me think about how that counterfeit plays out, right? Somebody's scrolling on their phone and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, what happened to the last 2 hours?"
Yeah.
Right? But it feels yuck. Well,
Yes.
we have the same
Counterfeit.
experience in conversation with
Yeah.
people, with each other, and with others of like, "Oh my gosh, it felt like it was 5 minutes," and
Yeah.
then but it's already been 2 hours, and it's like
Yes.
this joyful feeling.
Yes.
So it's why it's
Yeah.
isomorphic,
Yeah.
right?
That's right. It's structurally the same.
Yeah, and then another thing I was thinking about as you were talking was I read this great Substack piece by Alicia, and she writes on different things, but she was talking about actually skincare, and she was talking about a Japanese doctor named I'm not sure what type of doctor, if he's a physicist or what, but he's a Japanese doctor, Emoto, and he wrote a book about the mysteries of water. I think it was something like that. And basically, I think why this idea of like getting outside and how that again getting outside would mean you're not enclosed, right? You're going outside, so you're practicing a physical thing of like actually let me make my body do something that I desire for my mind to be able to do. But why this is relevant, or I think it's relevant, is that he's done studies on how you can speak to things like
Mm-hmm.
and have intentions toward water, and it literally has a different crystalline structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like under the microscope you can see how it forms differently
Mm-hmm.
because of people's words and their thoughts toward it.
Mm-hmm.
um, and some people might question it or not. I mean, there's probably
Sure.
much more that one could research on it. However, it's not really that difficult to see how that plays out, like
With people,
with people.
certainly.
Like a
Yeah.
tone of
Yeah.
voice will
Yeah.
change the atmosphere
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
instantaneously,
Right.
and
Right.
tension will change things instantaneously. And his point is that it's scientific, basically,
Sure.
that like
Sure. Sure.
that your
Sure.
intention for towards something or someone will literally change things. And I
Right.
guess why I'm bringing this up is because even to be open to that sort of idea and to be willing to try it in the midst of the fact that it's going to be basically you're going to have to do that without expectation, essentially, is to me philosophy, really. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's being able to say, oh, like maybe things could be different, or it
Mm-hmm.
feels so hard, like in Enclosure it feels so impossible and it feels like
Mm-hmm.
there's no exit, and it feels like,
Mm-hmm.
but we talk about hell is locked from the door, is locked from inside. So um, what that means is that actually there is an option. You can move the needle. Things can change. It can get better, and it really does, a lot of it fundamentally start with changing your mind about something, changing how you speak about something, how you
Mm-hmm.
speak around things. And that's the thing. Philosophy will do that thing in the moment of feeling tension with your spouse or whoever it is, that you start to be like, okay, don't take it personally. They're just like take,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is, like or uh okay, they don't get it. Okay, wait, why do I think that they don't get it? What, or is it something that, okay, interesting, what do I get it? What does it mean that
Yeah.
I get it and they
Yeah.
don't get it? What does that even mean?
Right.
Like all of that sort of that's so important. But yeah, I just thought about this, like and it was great that Alicia was kind of saying like this is literally accessible to you 24/7. Her point was that when you speak and see your skin and give it like the intention of love and care and appreciation, like that is probably the best skincare tip
Sure.
that you can do, was even if you're into like homeopathy or like herbalism, to
Mm-hmm.
know what things are good for your skin or not. But like I thought that was a beautiful point, and just the idea that because the skin is made up of so much water, especially our lower layers of skin. So yeah, anyways, the point of the matter is just that being able to speak anew and to speak differently, to think differently, is all there. It's all there for you. Like it's not. This is not something that's not possible for
Right.
people to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, the tricky thing with the enclosure is that you won't even know that those possibilities are real for you or could do anything for you, because it's kind of hard to like you're just so sunk down, like low, that
Mm-hmm.
it's, again, with the reserves in terms of actual energy in your body, and then patterns, and then hurt, and then all of that, where it's almost like you want to believe it, but that couldn't be for me, or that
Yeah.
couldn't be for
Mm-hmm.
us, or we
Mm-hmm.
I've tried that,
I've
I've
tried.
tried that.
I've tried.
and
I've
and I
tried.
and it's like, that's interesting how we'll say that, because and the Village women have a wonderful episode on the term trying. But it's what do we really this is philosophical. What do you mean by you
Yeah,
tried?
but that's
Like,
philosophy
what does that
exactly,
mean?
right.
Like, did you literally like journal every single day with good intentions about your husband who you are upset
Mhm.
with, or your wife that
Yep,
you're upset with? I'm just saying because we're
yep.
talking on the topic of a
Yes,
spousal relationship, but this can go for any relation with
yes.
your child or
Mhm,
your
mhm.
boss or whoever it is. Like, what do you mean by you tried?
Yep,
And I get it. Like people, it's and we've all been there as humans because again, when you're in that fear place or you're in that hurt place, you go back to just enclosure
yes.
primordial patterns. You go there for survival, but like in a sense our to be fully human is to kind of rise up and like kind of rise up to to the place where you can say I'm going to actually challenge my patterns and look at myself and think about what I'm doing and not give and not just assume it's not right just because it didn't happen the first time. It's like I'm going to keep on with what I can do and what is in my control and what's not in my control.
Well, yes,
So a
I'm
lot of that. So
well
Dr.
well,
Emoto.
but notice, like, when people go to the village sessions or any of these coaches or anyone, basically, they're looking for philosophy, they're looking
Yeah.
for a reframing,
Yeah, they're
like,
looking for a
they're
reframe.
looking for a reframe
Yep.
that would change the meaning. When, you hear that, I tried, nothing works." That's all enclosure language.
Exactly.
It's all, "I'm
Yeah.
enclosed and I can't get out." No, well, then you need a meta move. Like, if
Yeah.
you're enclosed, that means you need a new dimension,
Hmm.
right? So,
Hmm.
you need what kind of conversation adds new dimensions, uses words differently, approaches thoughts differently, philosophical.
Yeah.
So, you're also like, for example, when somebody says something like, you say you tried, but what are you getting from that failed effort?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
second, yeah,
They'll talk
right?
a lot
So
about
you're
that.
like, oh, I've never used words. I've always used words in a manner where I'm just thinking about how the other person receives them. I'm not thinking about my
Mm,
self-reference in the use of the words,
mm,
right?
yeah.
So that's doing what? It's adding a dimension to
Yes.
your language use,
Yes.
right? So if you do poetry, you can learn new dimensions to words, right? Well, if you learn all of these things, like, this is what we're pointing out. If you're in a situation where you're like, I've tried everything and it doesn't work, that means by definition the problem is dimensionality.
Yeah.
You are missing a dimension in your approach.
Hmm.
How you talk,
Hmm.
the way you use language. It's going to be like, if it's relational, it's linguistic. It's going to involve
Yeah.
communication. There is a dimension your communication is lacking. So we can say it's lacking a vertical dimension that is too horizontal, and the only way you can get vertical is going to be philosophical. It is going to be something philosophical where you're able to ask the question, well, what does it mean X, Y, and Z? Or
Yeah.
what does it mean to serve? Like, what does it mean, these different things? So you have to add that dimensionality.
Mhm. No, that's good, Daniel. And I think also, look, like it can feel really, really hard for people. They do feel trapped, right? Um, I think that instead of it just being like, well, just don't feel that way. Well, it's like that's a stupid kind of
Yeah,
advice.
because
But
you're still in the enclosure.
yeah,
There's no new
right.
dimensionality. You're
But
telling them to repress.
yeah, exactly. Whereas the dimensionality of the questions and the philosophy is to start to say, like, you have the power
Hmm.
to deconstruct for the sake of understanding better what you mean so
Yes.
that you can have a better sense of what do you want to mean, what do you want to be, how do you want to feel.
Hmm.
And it is interesting how um like there is something that is the maturation process that comes into, and it's interesting because I was thinking about it from a parenting perspective, instead of it just being like no, we talked about this too, right, in our other episode about like
Hmm.
getting comfortable with no. But the interesting thing is like getting creative with yes, right? What are you saying yes to when you're saying a no to something? And why that matters is because as you get into your adulthood, you often know, and this is also the village women talk a lot about this too, but it's like this idea of understanding like what is it that you like, what do you want? And so much energy is put on the negative, right? That it's hard. I don't know that it's interesting. It might be shocking to a person if they haven't even like, could you've probably spent like hours, I mean, hours, days. I
Hours.
mean, it probably is amassed to a year or whatever, months, a year, 2 years in your mind. Um, of all of the negative things or all the negative things about yourself, all the negative things about the other person. But like, have you put that same energy into the positive things? Like, what are the things that you can find positively about yourself, about the other person? What are the things that you desire to feel with that person? What are the things you just like? What could it look like? Have you spent enough time visualize? I know, and I'm
But
not trying
but
to say like
most people s
visualize it, then it
but
happens,
but
but you
most
have
people
to.
say they try. I've tried that, or I've done
Yeah,
that,
but you
right?
can't you can't really know, I guess, what they're actually doing.
Most people say they've tried that. I would just say that all of that's useless without philosophy, because 'cause you're not adding new dimensions. Like, if you don't go from
Mm,
algebra to geometry, those are just they're you're not those just become words that will make your next hitting the enclosure more painful. Because
Mm.
you see,
Like
like,
it's like a dangled a hope, and then the person feels like
yeah,
it
I
just
mean,
kind of.
to me, what you're that point is getting to why the therapy can be so bad. Like, if it's
Mm.
not done correctly,
Yeah,
because it makes people feel like it's going to work this time, it's going to work this time, and all it does is it doesn't work, and then they give up. So it like really matters that people like I guess the point I'm getting at is it really matters how people go about trying to fix the enclosure problem. Because if they go about trying to fix it from a means that doesn't fix the enclosure, then they become really helpless. Like they give up because they poured all this hours. And the idea is yeah, without philosophy, like because everything you're describing about doing that for me has to be done in a philosophical way,
oh yeah.
not just a quote unquote therapeutic way.
Yeah, not just like, well, visualize it till it happens. No, but you do have to kind of have a sense of like, do I have the ability to, in my own mind, recognize what it is that I desire to see and feel with that person? Because you may actually have it and not even know you have it.
But without
You know what I'm
philosophy,
saying?
the answer is no. Without
Yeah,
philosophy, the answer is no,
because
because you can't deconstruct your preset notions. You can't deconstruct your ideas of the
yeah,
meanings of words. Like without philosophy, the answer is no.
yeah,
And that may sound like way too harsh, but it's not because you're stuck at, let me put it this way. Without philosophy, you're stuck in the good. You're stuck in your ideas of the good, right? Because this is what happens to a lot of people. Like a lot of people accept the enclosure, the inability to relate to their spouse because they see themselves as the moral suffering servant. Like I do all of this for the family, I do all this for the marriage, and I'm not appreciated, but God appreciates me or something, or I'll be judged as a saint, right? People justify the enclosure with some sort
absolutely.
of ethical structure,
Hmm.
which then the problem is you can't since it's always, in my opinion, it enclosure always comes down to some deconstruction of your notion of the good. So if you don't come down to a deconstruction of your notion of the good, everything that you do about envisioning or what do I want to see will actually be in service of that good, which will just ultimately contribute to the enclosure. Like this is where beauty is everything because you have to realize no, it's about being beautiful, not just being good. Like we have to relate in a manner that creates beauty in the geopedic. Like if you don't do that, well then you're ultimately just going to re-enter an enclosure or not be able to escape it. And I think that's where a lot of people are. And I think a lot of people, um, I think a lot of people get into an enclosure. They then, after 5 years, says, "No, I'm really going to change it. I'm going to do something different." So then
Hmm.
they really try. They do a lot of the therapy stuff. They read the books. They have conversations with people. They have yeah, I'm going to do it, and they do it, but without philosophy, it fails. And then they go, well, I tried, and they become hopeless and just accept the status quo, and then dying unto death. Right? I think
Yeah.
that's the fate of most people.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good point. And I think too, I mean the village woman would probably say also people do a lot of intellectual work
Yes.
without doing the like, are you literally getting stuff in your body for your body that like
Mm,
actually equip it to
mm,
handle change? Because
mhm.
otherwise you won't be able, you won't have the ability to hold on to what
Yeah, you
you've
won't you
then
won't hold it. Right.
changed. And
Mhm.
for me, I mean this what why I'm interested in that nexus is because there does seem to be something where people read a lot of, like, they'll do a lot of the intellectual work, which is necessary and important, but there's it's difficult for them to. And I actually no, I just did a record. Sorry, really quick. I did a recording. I haven't done anything with this recording, but I recorded it and I forgot to tell you. But I did
Mm.
this recording thing on true ignorance because I was thinking some more thoughts related to it. But the other issue with like the ways in which we've learned for much of our lives is basically to learn it here, to test on it, and then to forget it, more or
Yes,
less. Okay,
yes.
more or less, because how are you going to practically apply European history, right?
Mm.
Now, somebody who might be really, really like they're gifted in that area. They
Yeah.
want to think about geopolitics. They want to go into politics. Like, great. But the fact of the matter is, so little knowledge that we learn is something that we will apply to like our bodies, our actual bodies.
Mm,
So then, when it comes to marriage or relational issues, and then you're like, I want to change, you just go back to the school metric. You just say, I'm going to learn it enough to the point where I'm going to change this, gosh darn it, and yet you're not doing anything differently necessarily with your body.
yeah.
And then how are you expecting that? It's like then there's that like big fall, right, where you like, I'm going to change, I'm going to do this, I do all these things, and
Mm,
then there's the fall because
mhm.
you literally, the vessel for that to change, to be different in, or for it to be different, has not changed at all, right? So then it's it just, I guess I'm just thinking about that too, because and it's I think that this can be validated, what I'm saying, in the fact that this happens so much with, again, how we learn. Like, because what my point was in my recording was the idea that there's, you don't know what you don't know, and then there's also, interestingly, the stuff that you don't know what you know. Like
Sure.
you can know a lot of stuff, but unless you're doing something with it, like you talk about with the flowers and stuff,
Mm,
you know the names because you have to suddenly sell them, and people ask
mhm.
you about them. But otherwise, basically, unless your knowledge is like that actual knowledge for you is only relevant in so much, or even I can say like, sure, what I mean to say is that knowledge, you having that knowledge can only be said to be had to the degree that you're actually doing something with it, that you're actually
Sure.
like
Mhm,
doing something
mhm.
in your everyday life about with it. Because guess what, if you're not, you can know it, and then the time comes when it really is applicable,
Yeah,
and
you
you won't
won't
do it.
yeah, you won't do it.
You won't
Correct.
you'll say,
Mhm.
wait, didn't I know that thing? Like I thought, gee, I learned that stuff about this, and then I didn't use that at all, I didn't apply it at all. And it's like, yeah, because you weren't applying it every day, you weren't applying it
Correct.
in the everyday life. And that's why I think too, like with philosophy, what's so important to see it as this quotidian thing that's not just reserved to the ivory towers and all of that
Mhm.
is like, because it matters so much, because you have the opportunity in every moment, even in doing the dishes or the laundry, to think anew about what you're doing, or like what these things are, what it means to be alive, what it means to do things repetitively. Like, because you'll need this skill, you will need it, and you'll need it also to make, if you want to make some massive change in your life, you're also going to need the energy. You're going to need the
Yeah.
energy and the
Mhm.
capacity in your body to actually like maintain that change. And it's not just going to come from reading enough. Like, yes, we're all about reading the books, right? But this is where it's funny, and the artist way, right, with Julia Cameron, where she's like, she actually says that in her recommendation for her 12-week 12-week program thing, that stop reading, right, don't read. But it's not to never read again. Obviously, you're reading a book, and that's ironic. But the point of the matter is that how much we really need to be clear with how much we're taking in and what we're doing with it. So if you can be sure that what you're reading, you're actually, and you do this really well, Daniel. Like you'll put it into notes, you'll be putting it into something you're going to work on, and then it applies to also how we might do family life or whatnot. That's where it's like actually becoming something you do something with. And I think that people don't have they don't know, like they don't I'm like, and it's they don't know that there could be a different way, first of all, and then second of all, they've only ever practiced and patterned in a way that is not going to equip them to actually make a real
Right.
change, because
Yeah.
they've only ever done it in, let me read and apply, read, apply, read, apply, but the application is still almost too in the headspace too much.
Mhm.
And as soon as you get a little bit of pushback, again, there's no energy to be able to like really show up in a loving, graceful but clear way. I don't know. What do you think
Well
about that, Daniel?
well,
Because I'm just saying, like, it feels almost like unfair, right? People are trying so hard, right?
yeah.
They're reading so many books,
Yeah,
they're doing
yeah.
all the
Well
things,
well
and
well, people don't read. For like, the average American is like, what, a book a year? They're not reading. Second, I mean, there is a sense in which, yes, people are being very intellectual, but I almost wanna say it's not intellectual. It's
yeah, it's
just a
like a
voice.
pseudo
It's just
intellect.
a voice in their head. It's griping, it's grumbling, it's just a voice in their head.
Mhm.
It's not really intellectual in the sense of pen, paper,
Or
study,
it's
deconstruct.
consumerism, because if you read a book and you basically just consume and go to the next one,
Well,
solve your problem, you didn't.
a lot of books are consumeristic. They're written 250 pages, kind of New York, that airport books that are going to change your life, but really just they just contribute to your enclosure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, especially if you don't do anything with it.
well, yes, yes, of course, but the things that they'll tell you to do, like, so for example, if you were to start getting up early in the morning as common advice, but you didn't learn how to change the quality of conversation, your relationships won't change. So getting up early won't help you necessarily with the enclosure problem.
Yeah.
Oh, it might make you feel better until the other person wakes up, but it ain't gonna help you
For
with
me,
your,
it's
it won't help you with your enclosure problem. Basically, the other point that you're getting at that I think is important is you lose what you don't use, right? Um, if you don't do philosophy every day, if it's not just the quality of your
yeah.
interactions, and you're not going to have it when you're not going to, it will not be at hand when there's a conflict or something that could lead to an enclosure to stop that, right? It's not going to be there.
Mhm.
I think that the other thing I want to say is that you're going to lose anything you don't bring into your relationships. Like, it's not merely the sense of, like, let me put it this way. What you use, especially as you get older, and this I think is more relevant for couples, uh, what you use in the relationship is what will define and that you'll keep. And especially keep in the relationship, right? So, like, if you're not using philosophy in the relationship, you're going to lose philosophy. And if you don't, it's just going to turn into that academic form of philosophy that is memorizing text and being a Nietzsche specialist or whatever, right? So if philosophy is not brought into, like, there's something to be said about the only way to get sublated forms of things is to bring them into relationships.
Mm.
Like, you can't sublate philosophy unless it's brought into your relationships. You can't sublate theology. You can't sublate conversation, thinking, seemingly anything, unless it is brought into your relationships, because that's where the test is.
Yeah.
That's where the negativity is. And sublation has to be through facing the negativity, as we talk about a lot with Goodell and others. So when philosophy is not brought into your relationships, um, if you don't lose it, the form you keep might be better off to lose. Because it might just be contributing to isolation and
Mm.
actually helping you cope with your enclosure. Like a lot of things end up just helping people cope with their enclosures. They like sports or watching sports because it helps them forget the enclosure. They like philosophy because they can distract themselves for a bit. Like if we want the fullness of not just the human beings, but all things, then they have to be able to be brought into relationality with other
Mhm.
people. But that's hard because people misunderstand one another and they get hurt and so on and so forth, right? I think also, like, I guess another just kind of practical live thought on what exactly philosophy does in a conversation is that it allows you to change scopes or to ask what's really the point of this discussion? What should I focus on? Right.
Mm.
So, like, let's take the examples of the water molecules in speaking, right? There are many people who critique those studies. They think it's kind of new age and very problematic and different things. But the point you're making about how speaking does that in conversation,
Yeah.
right? So we have a choice. I could say, well, that's not true. Scientists have shown that's false, or a lot of people critique it, and then it's awkward, right? Or I can listen to you and decide, well, what is the right scope by which to reply to that,
Yeah.
right? Because you're clearly making you're saying that even if that was not scientifically backed, it is analogically valid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's clearly what you're trying to get at. That's clearly also true, right? From just experience.
Experience. Yeah.
So when I respond to you, I'm going to respond to that, not make a big deal about the critiques of that study. And then you don't even know if those critiques are valid and have you. Because the other thing, if I were to say, well, scientists, they disagree about that. Do I really know the studies that well, right? And how, those studies might just be asserting that, right? And there may
Unless
be
you how do
counter.
you how do you volley to that?
Yeah, that you can't. That's the point. That's what I'm saying. So it's an enclosure, right?
Mhm.
So the point I'm getting at is that in a conversation, you have to have the ability to tell what angle to reply to keep the volley going. But that means you have to be able to move. You understand? You have to be able to tell what is the right thing to follow the conversation down. Do we follow the analogical principle or do we follow the
Mhm.
factual claim? Right. Well, you clearly said in your point, like you clearly when you were speaking directed it in an analogical direction, right? So we'll go that way,
'Cause it's
right?
like, I know I haven't looked into the research hard enough.
Sure.
I thought the idea was beautiful.
Yes.
I thought that, wait, well, okay, if I
And that
even if
idea has value.
and the idea is also like extremely experiential, anecdotal. We all see this because if I and I was just talking to one of our kids about this, how much like the fact why does tone matter? Because
Yes.
like you can say two things that are the exact same words on paper, but with a different tone, completely different atmosphere, completely
Yes.
different reactions,
Yes.
completely different. So if we see that happen, basically the structures of people's faces like changes.
Yes.
And I know maybe it feels like a stretch, but I don't think that it's even disputable. But if you wanted to dispute it, that's fine. But tone of voice is going to change the atmosphere, and you say, well, what does that have to do with intention? Well, because usually, even though you're kind of unconscious to it because you're so quick, like we're all so quick with how we
Yes.
talk sometimes, but there usually is some type of intentionality behind that, or
Yes.
um
Definitely.
there's something behind that tone, there's some assumption, there's some intent, there's something that even if you didn't, maybe there was a lack of intention actually that then
Yeah.
didn't steer it in the right direction. So
Yes.
what I mean to say is it's like, okay, well, we could take or leave the studies, but let's think about how that might, like you're saying, analogically relate to how people change dramatically instantaneously in conversation. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's something to that, maybe there's something at least to the fact that we can see how this applies to enclosure and how we can change, how things can change very drastically, very quickly.
Yes, but if you pay attention to most people, it's as if they have no control at all over how they respond to the information. It's like they must respond to
Interesting.
it in a
Oh yeah.
factual way. They must point out that that may not be true. Like, it's as if they have no control, and
Control.
basically what
Yeah.
I'm saying is that if you don't have a life of philosophy, you're not gonna develop the habits of freedom. You're not gonna you won't have the ability not to go down the gutter, as Javier and I was at, like, that gutter of the discourse. You'll just have to go that way, right? Philosophy actually creates habits where you're free. Like, you can't basically, without philosophy, you can't be free in language use. Like, you're in a sense, you're not free how you respond
Mhm.
because you're so emotionally trained to go after
Mm,
the truth
mhm,
claim that you
mm,
can't stop yourself. And now and that's the enclosure. Like, every time you speak, I have to go that way, and every
mhm,
time you speak, it goes that way, and we're stuck. So these gutter
mm.
dynamics develop, if you will, these determinations we can't escape.
Well, and that's a really great point. It makes me think too about I've been thinking like like I said I was thinking about thinking about control recently even more. It's and I was thinking about the fact that so say like if somebody basically okay like let's say somebody hears what we're saying and they're like, well, you can't control the way I react, because they basically want to assert that they are in control
Yes.
and that they are going
Yes.
to pledge allegiance to the truth
Hmm.
or what's right. And so
Yeah.
they like,
Yeah.
in a sense, they shouldn't. This is honorable that they would
Yes.
automatically
Yes.
have a
Yes.
reaction
Yes.
that's
Yes.
patterned and
Hmm.
unconscious and
Yes.
is
Yes.
automatic. They're
Yes.
like, I
Yes.
didn't even
Yes.
like
Yes.
they feel like, but this
It's good I don't have control because all I could do is be tempted to lie.
exactly.
Yes.
This is kind of the crazy thing about it. But you know what? Like you said, or maybe this is what we were talking about in the kitchen. But there's like literally that person is not free.
No.
The weird thing is being able to actually make a choice when presented with
A statement.
a statement or an idea or a even an
Freedom is
invitation or
you.
even a request that you could choose to respond,
Yes.
because you could be like, well, I don't want to do it that way because you're just making me. Okay, okay, but then you're also admitting that you don't feel like you have control over reacting that way. So
Correct.
so you're wanting to claim control for yourself in it as you are not in control.
Yes.
It's the ultimate kind of like, or in that moment, it's sort of that irony, right? The contradictory nature of man. And the ironic thing is when you actually say, you know what, I will relinquish what and allow myself to control my reaction. And that's going to go against what I typically just don't even realize I'm doing, because maybe that is impeding the very thing that is trying to be facilitated here.
Yes. But you
So,
have to be able to ask about telos then and telos and
and then and
purpose.
like and I'll be honest, like even just thinking through the problem and that thing, it kind of hurts your brain a little bit because you're kind of
Yes.
like, it's just easier if it's just, oh, okay, well, yeah, you're right. I'm just, that person who feels controlled, they feel controlled, so the other person should never talk. But the thing is that people do talk to each other all the time. People do have engagements all the time, and there are certain things that are being, just the normal nature of relationships, right? Request or
Mhm.
um um invocations or invitations or all these types of things that for a how and for what and I mean yeah, so all of that to say, like, I'll throw it back your way, but I understand it can kind of bend the brain a little bit, but it's very important, because otherwise if we don't slow down and think through it really really hard, we're again even in like we'll just again just react and speak and do, and it's like you said, and then it's a good thing we're
Yes.
out of control,
Yes.
although we try to assert control.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's yes, it bends the brain, so you have philosophy to train the muscle, and if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
do it, you can't bend the brain, just like you can't lift 200 pounds on the bench. It's like there are consequences. So,
Yeah.
um, there's a lot of talk in Hegel and Germanites and people in that freedom is found in being able to choose your determinations or to choose to choose your determination because even if you like decide to question the facticity of the study. Did you decide it or just react? Because if you just reacted, you're not free. Like even if you chose to do that, like you looked at the different ways to respond to that, and you chose to go for, because for some reason you've gauged that's important, maybe because there's some reason, some externality. Um, then you need to choose that. But most people are not choosing. They're just going without even thinking about it, right? I
Mhm.
mean, freedom, human agency is very strongly tied to the Speaking Act. We spend way too much time focusing on do you choose chocolate or vanilla, or we don't think about agency
Hmm.
as what is on display in conversation.
Hmm.
Like, I think conversation is like the main place you see freedom exercised or not. And that's because conversation is like the main place that people end up in enclosure. And if you're in enclosure, you're not free. Like the ability to open the enclosure and make it have an ascent toward the beautiful is freedom, right?
Mm,
And so when you hear people talk, like when you see people stuck in enclosures, you get this radical feeling that they are not free, that they're stuck. Like they
mhm,
can't get out of this thing. Like no matter what
yeah,
they do, they can't get out of it. Yeah, because they don't have philosophy. Because they can't choose. Like you can't be free if you can't choose the angle by which you approach
mm,
things.
mm,
Like, let me put it this way. We think about freedom a lot in choosing to do a thing versus choosing the angle by which we approach a thing.
yeah,
Like freedom is found is when you can choose the angle by which I approach you or I approach what you said, because that opens a possibility of how we respond. If I take what you said about the water molecules analogically, that's a different direction we can go in. But if I'm stuck to just take it factually, well, then there's no freedom, right? So the ability to have a different approach, a different angle is how you get agency. And so, but what else opens up new angles in philosophy? Because that opens space, that opens dimensionality. And if you can't open dimensionality or space or different accounts, as Jockin will talk about, you're stuck. So, and then people live for 50 years in a relationship that is framed in one account or one way of approach, and they just repeat it. Like most relationships are just many relationships are just a repetition
mm,
of a dynamic of a single account that cannot be escaped
mm,
over and over and over and over again. You could, and arguably that is the quality of hell as
mm,
opposed to the quality of heaven. So it's very like it's very important to develop the agency
mm,
in speech, which I
mm,
think is inseparable from philosophizing your life.
mhm. Well, we could say
Yeah.
this, it's the circling versus the
I
spiraling,
mean
right?
orbiting, I mean
Orbiting, yeah,
developing,
yeah, orbiting,
unfolding,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
So I'm thinking about the control thing again because I think that's really good on what you're saying, where it's like, what is you said how we approach,
yeah,
right? So the approach is going to be really, it's interesting those words for like the approach often causes reproach, right?
sure.
And but how you approach something is going to really affect the quality, and that's why we talked about enclosure as quality, or it's a type of quality thing because
Yes.
um, it's going to literally change the quality of that engagement
Yes, and
and
that's
and
and that's slavery or
and
freedom.
yeah, and I mean, I think it makes me wonder if it's just like maybe people just need to get honest with themselves. Like, do you want to have conversation or not?
Most
Because
people don't. They don't because all they do is get hurt or they feel like it doesn't say anything interesting, waste time. Most people don't wanna have conversation. So
but do they what though? Like, what do they?
they settle with small talk, or they settle with the feeling that they're supposed to at least say something. Most people wanna verbally process more than converse. More people wanna get off their chest an emotion where they're mad at somebody. I
Well,
mean, it
it does.
depends,
Mhm.
like, do people want to exchange words? Sure. Do people wanna converse? No. They do not, because conversation is that co-mutual building. They don't know how to. They're
Well, that's what I was
enclosed.
gonna say. I was like, I don't, and we would probably this has probably come up at some point. Like, I wonder if people just literally don't know it's possible. Like,
They
they
don't.
don't know what it's like,
Because without philosophy, you
and
can't.
if they like you, yeah,
Without philosophy, you can't.
it's like there is another
There's no
way.
way to add dimensionality. You can't make you can only have conversation if you can add verticality. If you're stuck in the horizontal, you can't have conversation. You can exchange words. If you want a conversation, which is that co-building, talking about things you didn't know you were going to talk about, it grows and develops, and 3 hours go by. You have to have philosophy. Most people don't have philosophy, therefore, most people have never had a conversation. And so then of course, but if that is true and the relationship between relationship and conversation is like this, then that would tell you why most people's relationships are bad, or most people feel like their relationships are stagnant, or most people, yeah, a lot of people will say, well, it's good in a kind of manageable sense, but is it thriving? No, but they have no sense of thriving because they haven't had philosophy to have that unfolding
Mhm,
conversation.
mhm,
So they're stuck in an enclosure. Now, maybe it's an enclosure they've come to terms with and they accept it and it doesn't
yeah.
eat them alive, but it's an enclosure. Like the choices between ultimately life is a choice between enclosure or thriving. You have one of two choices, and you will end up in one of those or the other or the other.
Yeah, and I think about it with a candle. Like, if you do the enclosure on a candle, it's out.
Yeah, it's all.
It's not burning
It
anymore.
has no oxygen. You
Yeah, yeah,
suffocate. Most
yeah.
people, how many people talk as if they're suffocating,
Mhm,
as if I can't breathe. I'm just not
mhm,
free. I mean, the other thing I was going to say is if I choose between that chair and that bed, you could say that's a choice, but it's not really a choice because if I approach both according to A is A logic or commodity or spatially, that's not really freedom. But if I could look at that chair as a chair, practical, I can sit in it. Or what if we were to use that to put a Lego for it? Or, oh, that was grandma's chair. Notice when I go through the different accounts of the chair, that's more freedom than choosing between the chair and the bed.
Mhm.
Like different ways to approach the same phenomenon is
Mhm.
more freedom, because
Yeah.
you could argue that I chose the bed instead of the chair because of determinations,
Right.
causality,
Right.
or, I see one and it caught my eye, some physical explanation.
Mhm.
But if I start coming up with different accounts of the chair, it's the same physical stimulation, the same physical object. I am moving between the pragmatic account of the chair, the historic account of the chair, the creative account of the chair. I am moving between those. That is a far greater display of agency
Mm.
than choosing between two things.
Mm.
Choosing in one thing is where you find agency. And what ends up happening is in conversation, people can't choose in the conversation the ways they take it. They can't choose which scope by which to approach the statement,
Mhm.
and so they're not free. And so, why? Of course, why? If all of that happens when you speak with people, is that feeling? You don't want to do that. So most people don't want to do that.
Mhm.
So yeah, they're on their phone. They're scrolling Instagram. They're watching videos.
Mhm.
They're in proximity, but not relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, X, not Twitter, not Anchor, Spotify, Amazon. There's books. Buy the books.
Books.
And thank you so much for your time. All the
Thank you.
best.